Before we begin, I'm happy to announce the release of my newest book, Conscious Conduit, A Dowser's Guide to the Business of Ascension. This book is a new addition to my first book released in 2018. In this revised and expanded edition, I go into more detail about how you can use dowsing to expand your own consciousness, improve your life, and how to turn your dowsing hobby into a thriving business. The book is available in print or ebook form and retails for only $9.99. I'll be bringing copies with me whenever I make personal appearances, but you can get your own copy today at Amazon.com. And now for today's podcast. Welcome to High Vibes with your host, Bill G. At High Vibes, we're looking into what it means to be a fourth dimensional being in an ever-changing world. We hope that by listening to our podcast, you can feel a greater sense of peace and connection as we collectively raise our energetic vibration to the next level. And now for today's podcast. Hello and welcome to High Vibes. I'm your host, Bill G, and today's special guest is Walt Theissen. Now, Walt Theissen is the host of the podcast LOA Today. LOA Today has been around for 10 years, and they just celebrated his 1,800th episode. LOA Today broadcasts 5 days a week, and you can find it on all of your favorite podcast platforms. And I was actually a co-host on LOA Today back in the day. This was a few years back, and so I thought it would be fun to bring Walt on to talk about LOA Today and how to fit in with our theme of living in a high vibration life. So, Walt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill. I'm actually high vibe just being here, especially with that introduction. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, you also left something out because you and I did a show before LOA Today. We did a Freedom News Hour years and years ago, so we got like a background doing this podcast, online radio type stuff.
Yeah. Well, the Freedom News Hour. My goodness,
that was a while ago.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was 5.
No, that's like 12 years, something like that.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
It was.
That was back when I was, all into history and economics. And
right
now we're into vibrational stuff. It's just great. So let's talk a little bit about LOA Today. So what is LOA Today all about, and how does it help raise people's vibration?
Well, I'll tell you how it raised my vibration, because that's what got it started. And in order to tell that story, I have to go back to even before we did Freedom News Hour. I have to go back to just before the financial crisis.
Wow. Okay.
In fact, I'll even go back to the turn of the millennium, because that was around the time when I decided to go full-time self-employed. And at that point, I had a business in selling something that is no longer needed, but it was long-distance services. That was at a time when long-distance services were metered. So anybody who could get a discount on that would be very happy. And I had a nice thing going there. That crashed and burned when MCI basically went bankrupt and killed all of my contracts. So that was not a happy time. But I had just quit my job, and now I had to do something with it. So I said, what am I going to do now? So I decided I was going to become a web designer, web developer, and start getting that going, and ended up working with basically with very small nonprofit organizations. So little ones that you've never heard of, town-based, around the country. And then we're creeping up on 2007, 2008. Of course, that radio show I mentioned, you and I talked about financial policy, monetary policy, and a lot of my experience came out of that era, because I was like you, I was one of the few who could see that crisis was coming. The problem was I had no means to do anything about it. I couldn't sell the market short or anything. I had nothing to invest because my businesses had suffered because of what happened with MCI, and I was just struggling to get the thing going with the nonprofits. And I could tell, once a financial crisis hits, those nonprofits were all going to go belly up. My business was going to go up in smoke. It was like watching a slow motion train wreck, knowing there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
It was frustrating. And on top of that, my wife was also in business. She had a gardening business. Nobody pays for gardening in a financial crisis either.
Right.
So we literally watched as our businesses went poof and our income disappeared. entirely. And of course, in the middle of a financial crisis, especially where we were living, there are no jobs available. So the savings was going out the window fast. We were going deep into debt. And by the time 2012 comes around, we're deep, deep in debt, absolutely beside ourselves. What the hell are we going to do to climb out of this? It was a miserable, miserable situation. And the only thing I could think of is I had seen The Secret, the movie The Secret, which kind of introduced the world to this concept of the law of attraction. Before The Secret came out, I would have been pretty skeptical about the whole thing. By the time the 2008 financial crisis happened, I was willing to listen to anything because I couldn't figure out what the heck to do. And by the time 2012 comes around, I'm so frightened and so unsure about how to, because I had done everything that I'd been told to do. I had done exactly what I had been taught from a very young age. Here's how you succeed in life. And it wasn't working. And I didn't know why it wasn't working. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. So I needed to understand. Well, when you're deep in debt, you can't afford to hire a coach. You can't bring in a mentor. You can't join one of these, what do you call them?
Retreats or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, any of those things, right? You can't do those because you can't afford them. I couldn't even afford to buy a self-help book. I mean, it was that bad. So I said, well, podcasting is becoming a thing. I know what I'll do. I'll start a podcast. I'll bring on experts who know this stuff, and they can teach me for free.
Yeah.
And that's the impetus that got LOA Today started. And then the thing that surprised me, I kind of should have known this because of the show you and I had done before that. But what surprised me is how much I love doing it. So the first few years were about me resolving my issues and getting coached free by people who are expert at it. And then after we'd covered, the first 400 episodes or whatever, like, well, okay, we've covered law of attraction pretty good at this point. What do we do next? I wanted to keep going. I didn't want to stop. In fact, I wanted to expand it. So the story of LOA Today is it was all about self-help for Walt Theissen. And then along the way, oh my God, there are some listeners here. In fact, there are a lot of, where did they come from?
Right.
So yeah, that's how it happened.
And it's still going strong.
Still going strong. Yeah. In fact, I just finished recording an episode before I came on here.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when we were doing Freedom News Hour,
Yeah.
even though I enjoyed doing that show with you, it
Mhm.
was a bit of a downer in the
It
sense that,
was
yeah, because what we were talking about was
down. It was just, ugh.
it was dark stuff,
Yeah.
and it wasn't exactly optimistic. And
No.
and then, after we were done that show, and after I left that show, and then, I heard you doing this LOA Today, and then I'd say, hey, well, maybe I can be a co-host on this because I was doing this new thing, and this new thing was the Akashic dowsing with the spiritual response therapy. And I was
Right.
like, oh, wait a second, this looks like a good fit.
I was kind of surprised. Here we were, two guys who had been talking mainstream economics, and now we're both doing woo-woo. Like, how did that happen?
It was rather interesting. Yeah, and we did that for for about a year. We did that.
Yeah, you were on the show for about a year.
For about a year, and we had some really great episodes in there. In fact, some of them are still linked on my website
Yeah.
in the media section because some of those episodes were actually really, really good.
They were, yeah.
And then about a year, a little more than a year ago, about a year and a half ago now, then I just thought, hey, why don't I do my own podcast?
There you go. I love it.
And do this high vibes thing. And
I love the topic.
and at first I was like, all right, how am I'm going to do this a little bit differently because you record your episodes live to tape, and I wanted to do, a little more of a polished product. And
Sure.
and to each his own. It's all up to their your personal taste. And
well, you got to be true to yourself, and that's what you were, which is the best thing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And figuring out what is true to yourself as a podcast host is challenging because
out of the gate.
Right out of the gate, because when you first started LOA Today, you were thinking, okay, I want to get these experts, these certified LOA coaches to come and teach me live on tape the principles of law of attraction. And some of these guys, I still follow some of these guys, like Joel.
Oh yeah.
Joel
Elston.
Elston.
Mhm.
Is he still on your show?
He's not. No.
No.
What I made a scheduling change a few years back, and it didn't match his schedule at all. That guy is just incredibly busy.
Oh my
He
goodness.
he, he
I
has an
still follow
absolutely
him on Facebook. So yeah,
yeah, he has an absolutely chock full coaching practice.
yeah,
And he used to be a therapist before that. So I mean, he just well, yeah, this
yeah,
guy's in demand.
and D'Souza, Joe D'Souza,
Louis D'Souza.
Louis
You know,
D'Souza, Louis
Louis is
D'Souza.
still on.
Yeah.
He's actually I think he's the longest going co-host right now out of all of
Wow.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, these are people who are really, really strong experts in their field. And
Yeah.
actually, Linda Armstrong, who I interviewed in last week's
Yeah.
broadcast, was also a co-host
She was
on
out
LOA.
for about 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the title of the show, High Vibe,
Yeah.
because ultimately that's what LOA Today is about also. In fact, I don't know if you probably knew this. I really emphasized it since you've left, I know, but I can't remember how much I emphasized it while you were on the show. I subtitle it Your Daily Dose of Happy.
Yes. Yes, you do.
Okay. And it has become it's like anything else with the law of attraction. The more you focus on something, the more you get of it. And so by making that a subtitle, it has actually taken on a life of its own in terms of keeping the show high vibe.
Right.
So when you're talking about doing your podcast on the topic of high vibe, I think, yeah, that's exactly where I am with mine too. And how
Right.
appropriate that is.
So let's talk a little bit about law of attraction, because maybe some
Okay.
of the people listening to this podcast don't know what law of attraction is.
Are there people like that these days?
I don't know. I'm assuming they, when I sit down with a client sometimes and I'm doing my Akashic dowsing and whatever, and I ask them, we get to a chart that is like heavy into law of attraction,
Mm-hmm.
or and I ask them, okay, have you ever heard of law of attraction, Abraham Hicks and whatever? And they're like, oh yeah, yeah. Or but a lot of times they're like, nope, never heard of it. And I'm like,
Really
oh,
interesting.
or
Interesting.
or even like Reiki. And like, have you heard of Reiki? No, I have
Really.
never heard of Reiki. I was like, oh my God, that's like the gateway drug
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
the world of energy healing. It's
Right. Yeah.
so
Oh,
so
okay. So that's education. Thank you.
yeah, well, I mean, so just as a quick little primer, why did you gravitate to law of attraction as opposed to some other philosophy?
I think I liked what I saw in the movie The Secret. And
Hmm.
if you haven't seen the movie The Secret, see it. Um, Most often the version you're going to find is the second best version. It's a great version. If you can find the one that has Esther Hicks in it, it's very hard to get. Watch that one instead. It's actually slightly better, but either one is really really good. And what they were talking about in The Secret was the law of attraction, and I recognized it as being about positive thinking. That was my first impression of it, and I already had some background with positive thinking. I was one of the few who, no, I'm going to really date myself here. I was one of the few who actually had Tony Robbins cassette collections from the 1980s.
Me too.
You did too.
I
Okay.
had the Tony Robbins. Yes, yes.
I remember reading Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich,
Read
and
that
I
one
also
too. Yep.
remember thinking, I don't understand this. It didn't make any sense to me. I said, this sounds like a bunch of rubbish to me. How could this
Mhm.
possibly be? But it was so popular and so many people had bought it. I figured, well, there's got to be something to it. What am I missing? And there was a part in the book, by the way, that really pissed me off. I don't remember exactly where it is, but it was a section of the book that says, if you know what it is we're talking about, we don't have to explain it to you. That's a paraphrase. That's not the
Yeah, yeah.
exact wording, but that was the essence of it. And my reaction was, no, you can't do that. You got to explain it to me. I don't get this.
Right.
So that kind of summarized where I was at when The Secret came out. And I saw The Secret and I recognized these are a lot of the same topics that I've heard before, that I've heard explanations on. I was actually part of a sort of an Amway type organization for a while that taught a lot of the same kind of stuff. I actually worked, you know who W. Clement Stone is? I actually worked for W. Clement Stone's original company for a short time.
Oh,
So I got it there as well. But it never totally fit for me. And when I watched The Secret, I realized it still doesn't quite fit for me. I don't quite get it. But I'd had enough exposure to it that I said, I think there's something here. I
Mhm.
just need to understand what it is and how it works. And really what I needed is I needed to find a way to believe it.
Right.
That's really what it amounted to. So, in terms of what law of attraction is, there are lots of ways to define it. The easiest way I like to think about it is this: what do you give the the majority of your attention to on a daily basis? You see, people usually explain thought law of attraction in terms of, well, I want to attract a house or a perfect mate or the right job or $1 million or something like that. That to me is the confusing way to understand it. To me, the easier way to understand it is, where do you give your attention throughout your day? Because we are very habitual people. We our thought processes are so similar from one day to the next. 95% of the things we think about today are the same things we're going to be thinking about tomorrow and giving our attention to. And what do we give our attention to? We give our attention to what goes on out in the real world, right? The people we interact with, our jobs and our families and our friends, and what we see on television, and what the latest politician said, and what happened over in Europe. And that's what we give our attention to. So now the next question becomes, and this is the most important one: how do you feel about those things that you give your attention to? Because if you really are going to be honest with yourself, you're going to find that, well, actually, they've done studies, so that's where I can get the number from. 80% of the stuff you pay attention to is stuff that you don't like. It's kind of scary when you think about that. You're giving 80% of your attention to stuff that you don't like. Well, let me tell you, it gets even more scary when you understand and realize how the law of attraction works, because what the law of attraction says is, when you give your attention to stuff on a predominant basis, you're going to get more of it. Now, I don't mean to scare people,
Yeah. But it's true.
But it was a real, once I finally grasped that, then law of attraction made sense to me, and it scared the shit out of me. Mm-hmm. Because then I realized, oh my God, how am I going to control all those thoughts?
And actually, what I discover when I do my Akashic dowsing with people is we are paying attention to, we're bringing into your attention, into your conscious awareness, the subconscious thoughts that are generating those present moments.
Right.
That present, where am I? Because people want to know, where am I in my present moment? And I mean, you've experienced the charts before. You're like, they're not positive. They are.
No, they scared. That scared the crap out of me.
Oh yeah, but they're designed to show you your shadow, because a lot of people like to ignore their shadows, and they'll allow their subconscious to keep paying attention, that 80% of all the things that bring them down, bring their vibration down.
Yeah.
And not really understand the genesis of it, and where did it come from? Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? And really metacognate that and say, wait a second, if I don't know why I'm paying attention to the news all the time, I don't know why I get so scared when it comes to money and whatever, I need to know why. So that way I can change it, because I can't change it if I don't know why I'm doing it. And that's what I love about the charts and the Akashic dowsing in general. It gives you, okay, well, this is why you're thinking about it. Now you have an opportunity to change it.
Yeah.
Because now you can actually take that and say, all right, I'm going to say, all right, well, that's not me. I'm going to say, because I am a being of light and love, I am going to take that and put it over here. And that is not me. That is just something that I've constructed in this 3D reality that I think defines my existence, but it doesn't. Because what's really my real reality is I am a being of light and love, and I can choose my reality whatever I want it to be. I can change my present moment, and that changes my future, and it changes my past too. So I can change my whole life story by simply changing my mind right now about what I think, what I'm paying attention to.
When you understand it that way, it gives you an entirely different take on the old cliche that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, because all of a sudden that has new meaning in ways that the first time you heard it, it's like, oh, well, yeah, of course we are. We're having a physical experience. Yeah, okay, I kind of buy into the idea that we're spiritual. Yeah, so of course. Now, like, oh, this has teeth. We're not playing in the sandbox anymore. We're playing with live ammo here.
Absolutely. And there, I've before the show, I showed you some of the new protocols that I used
Yeah, yeah,
that my
interesting.
wife and I came up with. And what
Yeah.
I think was really cool about that, the charts were created through a channeling experience. We would use our pendulum and just we're trying to solve a problem. And
Hmm.
and then we experiment with them. Oh my gosh, these work really well. And then we ask then somebody asks us the question, well, why do they work so well? And so we're okay, all right. So then Nina breaks out the books
Mm.
and she's like, oh, they work because these incorporate biogeometry, they incorporate the visible light spectrum, then and radionics, and oh yeah, it works because of that. And it wasn't that we were thinking about that when we created them. We were just
Sure.
simply channeling our high self at that point.
Mm.
But then we realize that there is not just a little bit of scientific research that backs them up. There's a ton of scientific research that backs it up. And that's the same as true as LOA today, because LOA, law of attraction is a downloaded communication from the entity Abraham through
Yeah.
Esther Hicks. And it's not like she was an expert in self-help, all that stuff
She was actually
before.
freaked out
Yeah.
early on that this is going on. It just terrified her because she was brought up in a Baptist household,
Mm-hmm.
which taught about heaven and hell, and you're going to hell if you engage in witchcraft and all this other kind of stuff. And she's like, "Oh my God, I'm going to start channeling. Are you kidding? I'm going to burn forever in hell."
Mm-hmm.
So she didn't want to go there at all. Yeah,
And so, but then the things that she was saying resonated
yeah,
and resonated so much that people were like, whoa, this is something we need to be paying attention to this.
yes,
And then there were other people, more scientifically minded people out there, like, okay, all right, this all makes sense, but we need to actually test this stuff.
hmm,
And it tested out
yeah, and continues to.
and continues to test out. And so it really is true that the
Hmm.
more you pay attention to, the more you concentrate on what you want as opposed to what you don't want. And the universe conspires to make it happen.
And if you decide to do it the other way around by default, where you focus all your attention on what you don't want, get ready.
Yeah, that's
It's
exactly
coming.
what you'll get.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people wonder why they are miserable all the time,
Mm,
or they wonder why they are just battling illness after illness,
mm.
or why, oh, I have cancer now. Oh my gosh, it's the end of the world and whatever. Well, you attracted that into your being.
And that's a hard concept. Let's be
Mm-hmm.
perfectly honest. That's certainly at odds with what we're normally taught. But even more than that, I've heard, you probably have heard this too. I've heard on more than one occasion people criticizing the whole law of attraction teaching, saying you're blaming people for getting sick, you're blaming people for what's coming into their lives, and it's understandable where that comes from. It's very understandable. The person who's saying it doesn't realize they're actually uttering a mistruth
Mm-hmm.
because there's actually no blame involved.
Right.
But nevertheless, it's easy to see how you could very quickly go to blame on something like that, and so that's what people do. In fact, we live in a society where blame and shame, despite what the politically correct would want us to think, is part of our daily vocabulary. It's
Yes.
just built in.
Yes.
And probably the biggest part, the biggest challenge of learning something like law of attraction is being willing to leave the morality out of it, because it's so tempting.
And that comes up in the Akashic dowsing too. You have
Mm,
to let go of whatever moral compass you came into the room
yeah,
with,
yeah,
because you're going to be shown things that are going to trigger you.
it's going to
And if it,
happen.
yeah, every single time
Mhm.
people sit down and they're like, oh, it's a lot of fun when I'm at these events and I have a booth and people sit down and they
Sure.
think they're getting, a reading that's going to be entertaining. And I tell them right off the bat, like, if you're here for being entertained, I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here
Right,
to show
right.
you your shadow and it's going to hurt.
Mm,
But the good news is, yes, it may hurt in the short term, But once we rip that Band-Aid off, you'll discover that you've got some real healing opportunity here.
Are you familiar with the Apple TV show Ted Lasso?
No.
There's a really great cliche that comes out of Ted Lasso. It
Yeah.
goes like this: the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off. That pretty much summarizes it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it does. It pisses you off. Like you said, you got all this shadow going on there, and it really pisses you off.
And then there's the other thing too, that when people get into this work, sometimes they think, oh, okay, I'm going to do law of attraction. I'm going to think more positively. I'm going to reframe my thinking, and then everything's going to be great.
Yeah, surprise.
Surprise. No, that's not how it works.
Not the way it works. No,
because there's layers of it.
Mm-hmm.
Layers of the onion. Once you've licked one aspect of your shadow, there's about 10 other things there that you need to be facing. I've been doing
that's the overwhelming part. When I mentioned earlier that when I realized that 80% of my thoughts were negative, I was terrified because I said, I don't know how to control all that. How do you control? I mean, we're told we have like 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. I'm supposed to spend my day focusing on which thoughts I'm having. Forget it. That ain't going to happen. How can you possibly even live through a day doing that? It really scared the crap out of me. What I learned, and I learned this largely from doing my show and having some wonderful guests on, what I learned over time is it's not about being afraid of the shadow. In fact, if you can leave, we talked about the morality, if you can leave the moral piece off, and literally just leave that one behind. And a funny thing happens when you start studying the shadow. And this is going to sound this is going to sound more woo than anything that you've ever heard before if you're not familiar with law of attraction. The funny thing that happens is you find a way to love your shadow. That's mind-blowing. It's also the truth.
Because the more you kind of try and hide from it, the more it's going to show up.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this work for like 20 years, and I'm still shocked at the amount of work I still need to do.
Oh yeah, me too.
Back in the day, you did a series of LOA Today podcasts when you were doing Illusions by Richard Bach.
Oh, love that book. Yes.
And one of my favorite lines is, how do you know when you're done your work? And if you're still breathing, you still got work to do.
That's right.
Well, I want to publicly acknowledge the chart that I still use in my repertoire that you developed.
I love it.
And it was actually my first experience in using a quote unquote homemade chart.
Okay.
Based off of LOA Today, and it was the Abraham Hicks emotional scale,
which I can't take credit for. That actually is Abraham Hicks.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't take credit for it either. It's Abraham Hicks. Because some people ask me, hey, can you give me that chart and can you train on it? I was like, I can't really train you on it. It's not mine. It's somebody else's. If you want to learn how to use the Abraham Hicks emotional scale, buy the book.
Asking it is given.
Asking is given. Read the book, make your chart, and use it.
Yeah.
Because everything you need to know is in that book.
It is.
So that'll give you the background that you need to use that. And I use it in my Akashic dowsing because when I'm doing a reading on somebody, I let my pendulum choose which protocol we go to. I don't have a set protocol. Like, okay, we're going to do time temple first, and then we're going to do SRT next, and whatever. What I do is I allow the client to choose their specific focus. What do they want to focus on? The career, whatever. And I tell them, give me the most specific question you can possibly give me, because the more specific the question, the more specific the answer is going to be.
Yeah, sure.
It's uncanny every single time. But most people are like, I just want to work on being, a more enlightened being. I'm like, okay, all right. Ask a vague question, or you're going to get a vague answer. But that's fine.
It's a reasonable goal. Yeah, that's fine.
If that's where you are, that's fine. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it always excites me when somebody comes to me with a real specific question. And then I say, it's like, okay, now that we've got our specific focus, pendulum, just take us where we need to go. And when it goes to the Abraham Hicks emotional scale. What it's reading is, where am I right now in my emotion
Okay.
in terms of how am I manifesting?
Mm-hmm.
Because usually the specific focus is somewhere around the line of, why can't my career move in the direction I want
Right,
to move
right.
into? Why am I not in the relationship that I
Yep.
want to be in,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever? And
Yep.
so the emotion scale comes up, and it comes up somewhere along that emotion scale. It's 26 emotions within that emotion scale.
Mm.
And wherever it lies, that is where you're manifesting.
Yeah. So I call your predominant vibration.
Yeah, your predominant vibration. That is
Yeah.
where you are vibrating. And if you're vibrating on the upper scale of that, that may be part of the problem, where you're bringing in things that you want that are not what your specific focus is. Or it's on the upper scale, but it's not all the way up, and you're kind of content, or you're kind of optimistic, and you're
Mm-hmm.
not willing to things are going good for you to the point where you're not willing to put in the work to
Yeah.
bring yourself up even higher. And then you get the other ones that are on the other side of the scale, where, okay, well, there's no wonder here why you're always attracting things that are not working out for you,
Right.
because you're down in doubt, you're down in fear, you're down in depression.
Mm-hmm.
You're only bringing in those things that frighten you, and that's what's manifesting in your life.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I like that. The thing that goes along with that for me now, because when you're first exposed to that concept, you just explained it beautifully. Um, it becomes something that you kind of want to. Well, I want to avoid all that dark area down there. I want to be up in that high vibe space, which is perfectly natural. And there's nothing wrong with the desire at all. It's a perfectly legitimate and good desire, but it also kind of skips an important piece,
Mm-hmm.
which we were kind of alluding to earlier. The piece that there's so much more value about being in the down area with the intention of moving back up to the up area.
Right.
Because we live in a world of polarity. We live in a contrast world. This was one of the hardest concepts for me. We came into this world knowing what we were coming into. My favorite way of responding to that is, what the hell was I thinking? But literally, that's
Yeah.
what we did. We came into this world to experience this stuff. And the reason we do that is because we learn so much more from the dark than we do from the light. As long as we are finding that dark and moving up to the light with that information. That's what the real meaning of enlightened is.
Yeah.
The enlightened person is the person who went into the dark and took that information up into the light.
Yeah. Because if you start out in the light, you don't learn anything.
No.
There was a great book called The History of God. And it was
Isn't that a contradiction in terms? So
oh yeah,
sorry.
well, it was a channeled work. In it, it was describing this person's conversation with the creator.
Hmm.
And it was saying that, well, when we first created the physical world, the beings we put onto it, the humans that we put onto it, were all enlightened beings.
Hmm.
They were all already high up on that emotional scale, and
Yeah.
they knew and they had all the knowledge of the universe already. They had all the knowledge of time and space. But the problem was, they didn't want to stick around. The minute the going got tough, whatever it would rain, they'd be like, I'm out of here. Then they'd kill
Hmm.
themselves,
Hmm.
because they knew that this physical realm was dirty, and it had stuff,
Mucky.
yeah, mucky and icky. And they're like, well, I know there's a better way already. I can just make myself into a non-physical being again, because this is crap. I'm not going to stick around for this. And then the creator was like, okay, what we need to do now is we need to give them all amnesia. So, what they call the forgetting. And
Yeah.
so now they're all in physical bodies, and they now forgotten what it's like to be high frequency, high density beings, angelic beings. Now they believe that this physical life is all there is.
Hmm.
And now they've got to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
They have to spend their entire lifetimes learning how to live in that muck and filth, and knowing and having the faith and the idea, because they're still connected to the creator. We're all still because we're all connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
You're still connected.
Yeah.
Now you have to find a way to reestablish that connection and realize that, wait a second, this physical world, I can change this physical world to do exactly my bidding depending on where my emotions are, which is, the essence of law of attraction. If you
Mm-hmm.
can do that, if
Yeah.
you can raise your vibration to such a level where you are creating this ideal life for yourself because you have faced your shadow, you've cleared your shadow, and the thing is, you're never done. That's there's no end to that, but you find almost immediately once you start doing that, it starts, click, click, clicks in a place. Oh, wait a second. I don't need $1 million to be happy because I'm happy now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like what Neville Goddard was talking about too in his works too. It's like, if you're happy now, then you will be happy in the future too, because you're happy now. It's all about your now.
In fact, when you really get into the work of, say, somebody like Eckhart Tolle, he
Right.
makes the point there really isn't anything else. There's only now. There's no other options. It's not like there's a
Yeah.
menu here that you're choosing from. It's just now. That's it. And the only reason that we have a then and a future is because we create that in our memories
Right.
for the past, and in our imaginations for the future.
Right.
But
Right.
even when we're doing that, we're still only doing it now.
Right, right. And actually I've done a lot of research on even like past lives and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And some people get stuck on the idea of past lives are in the past. And they're like, no, they're in the present.
Mm.
You are living those past lives, those other, I don't even call them past lives anymore. I call them other consciousness expressions.
Mm-hmm.
You are living
Mm-hmm.
those other consciousness expressions right now because there is no time,
Mm.
because all we have is the present moment. And so the protocol I developed with the past life thing, or the other consciousness expression, is you receive a gift from that other consciousness expression who has information that you need in order to get over whatever you're getting over in that moment. But you have to give a gift in return, because whatever they're going through, you have something to give them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's and the thing is, because your help, so you've changed their path and they've changed your path, and that's how you can change the past and change the present and change the future.
It's a interesting thing because I hear what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying, but I'm also thinking in terms of somebody who's new to this, who
Yeah.
hasn't explored this before, and they're thinking to themselves what I used to think, which is, no, time is real. Here's how I know: 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, 4. Those are seconds. That's real.
Yes. I gave this talk over at the American Society of Dazzlers National Convention when I was talking about this very subject. And somebody raised their hand and asked, well, what about the butterfly effect? When you're going back in time and changing somebody's future,
Mm.
aren't you changing all of time and space? And my response was, bring it on.
I love it. Yes.
Because if you are raising the vibration of the past, you're also bringing up the vibration of the present, and
Mm-hmm.
you're bringing up the vibration of the future.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if we had a entire history of humanity that was on a high vibration? And then we know at that point the creator has done his job, and then we can move on to the next vibration.
And the thing that I like to think about here is, because there seems to be a contradiction in what we're saying here. The contradiction that seems to exist is, well, we were high vibe beings. Then the creator said, well, we can't let you be high vibe all the time. Otherwise, you can't have the human experience. So we got to make you forget all of that stuff. And now the goal is to be high vibe. Well, wait a minute, make up your mind. Which do you want? Is it going to be high vibe, or is it not going to be high vibe? And it is, I mean, where the logical mind goes with this stuff is just amazing.
Yeah.
It's a very understandable place to end up wanting to go. And that's where the challenge of the concept of now really comes into it, because like I was saying before, 1, 2, 3, those are seconds, right? Except that when I said 1, that was now. And when I said 2, that was now. And when I said 3, well, I couldn't say 1 in the past. I couldn't say 2 in the future. There's no way to do that. And so all of a sudden you're losing your grip on reality. Like, well, wait a minute, reality is just being pulled out from under my feet right now. I can't handle that. I am structured to think in terms of time because that's the way our world is organized. There's got to be time going on there. So you know what I did for myself in order to kind of get past that block? I looked at quantum mechanics, quantum physics.
Yep.
And in quantum physics, this is very well known, there is a phenomenon where if you have an observer who's looking at a particular experiment with an electron, if he's looking at the experiment and observing it, the electron will go in one place. If he's not looking, it'll go to another place. Well, what happened? The only thing that happened, it was observed. It was observed. Observing the thing changed where the electron went.
Right.
And that basic reality that science has finally come to grips with over the last 100 years upset all of the rest of it. It upended the entire previous 1,000 years of scientific history because that shouldn't be able to happen.
Right.
It should be just all objective. It should be its own little clock mechanism that just works on its own. But now all of a sudden an observer interferes with it. Well, you start, multiplying that out. Well, there are a lot of observers around here. All these observers are, oh my God, this is chaos. Yeah. This is like, the whole thing is just completely out of whack at this point. That's when I finally grasped that's how you can have something crazy like time seeming to exist and not existing. Because you got observers who are affecting reality all over the place. Right. And that's just the human observers. What I've come to finally realize over the last few years is what the continuum that we're all part of that you were describing earlier, often called source energy. That's my way of describing it. That source energy is in everything. Yeah. That's part of, again, that's the Einsteinian theory. Literally there is this, I forget how he described it. There is an energy that pervades the universe.
Consciousness that pervades the universe.
It's a consciousness. That's right. That's what he called it. And that consciousness is what we call source energy. Well, that means source energy is in everything. It's in this microphone. It's in this cup of water. It's in that insect over there. It's in that star over there. It's in that empty space over there out in outer space. It is everywhere.
Right.
And if all of that is conscious, that means all of it is observing, which means it's all observation. Everywhere. Right. Everything is observation. As far as the eye can see, as far as you can imagine, it's all observation. And when you realize that, and you say, well, shoot, anything's possible now.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we're a little bit long here, aren't we?
We are a bit long, but that's fine. I'm so enjoying this. Okay. So if people want to get their daily dose of happy, how can they find you?
Oh my God, go to your favorite podcast program. I don't care what it is, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I don't care what you use. Just search within it for LOA Today. You'll find it. It pops right up. So easy to find.
Well, you've been around long enough. You've tricked the algorithm.
I'll tell you what, and I'm sure this is happening for your show too. After a point, all of a sudden, all the little ones find it too. They just kind of like plug it in.
We're not quite up at that point yet, but we're getting there.
I'll tell you, do some searching. I'll bet you're in some ones that you don't even know that you're in.
Oh yeah, I know. It does. The other day I found that we were on Audible, and I was like, wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea that I was on Audible until somebody found it and said, hey, look, you're on Audible. I'm like, oh, cool.
Holy crap. What happened?
So thank you so much, Walt. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, I loved it, Bill, as usual.
And thank you everyone listening here, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening. For more information about Bill and Nina G, please go to www.vitalbioenergetics.com. See you next time.